want to watch Unrivaled, not because it's 3-on-3 basketball. There's one reason why they're not watching, and that's Caitlin Clark's not playing. Same reason nobody's watching college basketball right now, because Caitlin Clark doesn't play college basketball anymore. It's the same reason why nobody watched the WNBA until Caitlin.
According to Rachel Dida's analysis, Unrivaled inadvertently boxed itself into a corner by suggesting access to something it never actually had, Caitlin Clark. In the months leading up to its inaugural season, the league's marketing relied heavily on implication rather than confirmation. Social media teasers. Ambiguous messaging. Carefully curated vibes. Nothing explicit, just enough suggestion to let assumptions flourish. And for a time, it worked. Curiosity drove early viewership. Not because audiences were deeply invested in 3v3 basketball, but because they believed they might be witnessing the beginning of something transformative. The anticipation itself became the product. Then reality arrived. Clark would not be participating. Once that became clear, Unrivaled pivoted quickly, positioning Sabrina Ionescu as its central figure. And to be fair, Sabrina is a legitimate star. Highly respected. A championship-level player. A signature shoe athlete. Within basketball circles, her resume carries real weight. But here is the uncomfortable truth many avoid stating plainly: Sabrina Ionescu is not Caitlin Clark. That isn't an insult. It's a recognition of scale. Clark commands a different level of mainstream attention. A different cultural footprint. And Unrivaled appeared to recognize the difference almost immediately. Season 1 opened with strong energy, fueled largely by novelty. Early broadcasts performed well. The one-on-one tournament, in particular, resonated because it felt fresh and unscripted. But novelty is not permanence. Once the illusion faded, the league was left to stand entirely on what it truly was, not what audiences imagined it might become. And that transition is where the real test begins. Unrivaled's challenge now is not survival. It is definition. The league must establish an identity that does not rely on implied associations or borrowed gravity. Because if it doesn't, it risks forever being measured against a version of itself that never actually existed. And in professional sports, perception is not a side story. It is the story.
Pointing it out, like, you name somebody like Asia, you name somebody like Alyssa Thomas, but why aren't you mentioning Caitlin Clark? Like, why aren't you mentioning the person who continues to have the highest viewership, the highest attendance, all of these things, even when she was injured? Because again, she played 13 games this past season. She didn't play very much, but when she was injured and she was still going to away games, she was signing autographs for like an hour before the game even started. Like, you would see on the television, whether it was a home fever game, away fever game, Caitlin Clark would be signing jerseys, signing merch, all of these.
Predictably, reactions to this discussion have fallen into extremes. Some dismiss these concerns as exaggerated or malicious, thinly veiled attacks on Unrivaled's credibility. Others insist that the league is unquestionably thriving and that any suggestion otherwise ignores clear signs of growth. Both responses miss the point. This conversation is not fueled by hostility toward Unrivaled. And it is not driven by blind admiration for Caitlin Clark. At its core, this is an examination of structure, not sentiment. It's about understanding how star power functions within professional sports ecosystems, whether people are comfortable acknowledging it or not. Pretending that stars don't matter has never worked. And history is filled with leagues that paid a heavy price for ignoring that reality. The presence of a transcendent figure changes behavior. It alters media coverage. It reshapes audience demographics. It expands reach beyond core fans. That isn't opinion, it's pattern recognition. When leagues pretend they are immune to this dynamic, they often discover too late that they are not. This discussion doesn't argue that Unrivaled cannot succeed without Caitlin Clark. It argues that Unrivaled allowed the idea of Caitlin Clark to influence perception without securing the substance behind it. That distinction matters. Criticism rooted in analysis is not the same as criticism rooted in resentment. And acknowledging the importance of a star does not diminish the talent of others. It simply recognizes the asymmetry of attention in modern sports culture. Unrivaled has talented players. Respected names. Competitive integrity. None of that is in dispute. What is in question is whether the league underestimated how much its early attention was tied to an unspoken assumption and whether it fully prepared for the moment that assumption collapsed. This isn't about taking sides. It's about examining cause and effect. And uncomfortable truths often live in that space.
Caitlin Clark is redeveloping her image as she take over social media all week and long. Caitlin Clark get affected by these type of acts and things. You know, Caitlin herself is doing her part to keep her hype alive. She got big time sneakers that's coming out. Allegedly, there is going to be a reveal for the Super Bowl commercial. We can finally see how Caitlin Clark's shoes are going to look, is what I'm hearing behind the scenes. And that's what this video is going to be about, Caitlin.
This conversation ultimately exposes a truth many sports organizations resist acknowledging. Professional leagues are star-centric, whether they want to be or not. Ignoring that reality doesn't eliminate its influence, it simply blinds decision-makers to the consequences. This analysis draws heavily from Rachel Dita's breakdown, which stands out precisely because it avoids emotional shortcuts. Her approach is methodical, evidence-driven, resistant to sensationalism. She doesn't argue from outrage. She argues from patterns. And that distinction matters. Rachel's analysis doesn't suggest that Unrivaled is doomed. It suggests that Unrivaled underestimated the cost of implied star association. When a league hints at access to something transformational without ever confirming it, it creates a fragile foundation. Excitement built on suggestion cannot survive certainty. Star power isn't just about performance. It's about narrative gravity. It's about being the reason casual viewers tune in, even when they don't fully understand the format. And when leagues fail to account for that gravity, they often misread their own momentum. History is unforgiving on this point. Time and again, leagues that tried to sell parity while quietly relying on stars eventually faced the same reckoning. Stars drive attention first, and structure sustains it later. Reverse that order, and problems follow. Rachel's argument isn't accusatory. It's diagnostic. And diagnoses are only uncomfortable when they're accurate.
That analyst is Rachel the meetup. But I have to say, like, again, she's with congratulations for the new partnership with Sirius XFM or whatever it's called. Congratulations for the partnership. Definitely in terms of like actual, shows, it's her and Rosalina that do put out the best products. Like the likes of myself, Robin, and guys, we just ramble into a microphone, which is what I do well. Which is like, I have so much respect for people that actually, put the time in to make like good shows, because I'm not very good.
At first, none of this was spoken aloud. Unrivaled continued as planned. Games aired on schedule. Marketing remained confident, almost relentlessly so. From the outside, everything appeared stable, even thriving. New partnerships were announced. Production quality improved. Ambitious long-term visions were promoted with enthusiasm and certainty. If you weren't looking closely, there was no obvious reason for concern. But surface-level momentum can be deceptive. Beneath the polished visuals and optimistic messaging, a subtle shift was underway. Not dramatic enough to spark alarm, yet consistent enough to alter perception over time. Engagement patterns began to change. The conversations surrounding the league felt different, less curious, less urgent. When novelty fades, substance must carry the weight. And that transition is where many new leagues are truly tested. Unrivaled's early success was driven largely by intrigue. The concept was fresh. The presentation was modern. The promise felt bold. Viewers tuned in not only for competition, but to see what this league might become. That kind of interest is powerful, but also temporary. Once curiosity is satisfied, audiences need a reason to stay. That's when the narrative begins to shift. What once felt like momentum starts to resemble maintenance. Energy becomes effort. Optimism becomes insistence. And when a league continues projecting growth while subtle indicators point elsewhere, the disconnect becomes noticeable. Not immediately, but inevitably. This is where reinterpretation begins. Moments that once felt celebratory start to feel compensatory. Marketing that once felt exciting starts to feel defensive. Not because Unrivaled suddenly became weaker, but because expectations had been set higher than what reality could immediately sustain. This is not unusual. Many leagues experience this phase. But what makes Unrivaled's case unique is the gap between implied potential and delivered reality. That gap doesn't stay invisible forever. It reshapes how everything is perceived. And once you recognize that shift, earlier decisions begin to look different. Promotional strategies. Messaging choices. The careful avoidance of clarity in certain moments. None of these are inherently problematic. But together, they suggest a league that benefited from ambiguity until ambiguity became a liability. The danger isn't collapse. The danger is stagnation disguised as progress. Because when a league believes it's growing while the audience quietly disengages, the correction becomes much harder. Loud criticism can be addressed. Silence cannot.
Called Unrivaled. It's a 3-on-3 women's basketball league that was started by Nafisa Collier, who plays for the Minnesota Lynx, and Brianna Stewart, who plays for the New York Liberty, 2 WNBA players, have been the face of this 3-on-3 off-season league, Unrivaled. They've been paying players somewhat significant money to play in the Unrivaled league. This is year 2. The ratings have absolutely collapsed.
Unrivaled's challenge was never about talent on the floor. It was about gravity. About what pulls attention, sustains curiosity, and keeps casual viewers from drifting away once novelty fades. And at the center of that gravity, spoken or unspoken, stood Caitlin Clark. The most dangerous problems in sports leagues are rarely loud. They don't arrive with scandals or sudden collapses. They surface quietly, through softened metrics, muted conversations, and a gradual thinning of excitement. When viewership slips just enough to be noticeable, when public interest plateaus instead of climbing, the warning signs are already late. By then, the absence of a single name can feel disproportionately large. Unrivaled never officially promised Caitlin Clark. That much is true. But it didn't need to. The league benefited from implication. From suggestion. From an atmosphere that allowed fans to believe something monumental might be coming. Social media teasers, ambiguous messaging, and carefully managed silence did the work. Anticipation filled the gaps. And anticipation is powerful, but unstable. When the reality became clear that Clark would not be part of the league, the emotional response wasn't outrage. It was deflation. The kind that doesn't trend on social media, but quietly alters behavior. Fewer casual viewers tuning in just to see. Less urgency. Less cultural buzz. The league continued. The games were played. But the invisible momentum shifted. To Unrivaled's credit, the pivot was immediate. Sabrina Ionescu was positioned as the face of the league. A respected star. A champion. A proven professional with credibility and recognition. Within basketball circles, the move made sense. But star power isn't measured only inside the sport. It's measured outside of it. Caitlin Clark operates on a different cultural frequency. She draws viewers who don't follow women's basketball religiously. She converts curiosity into habit. That distinction isn't emotional, it's structural. And Unrivaled felt that difference almost instantly. Season 1 still opened strong. Novelty carried it. The one-on-one tournament stood out, not because of star attachment, but because it felt new and unpredictable. But novelty has an expiration date. Once it wears off, identity has to take over. That is where Unrivaled now stands. The league isn't failing. But it is no longer protected by illusion. It must define itself without leaning on what audiences once hoped it might include. And that is a far harder task than launching with hype. In modern sports, perception isn't optional. It shapes engagement, coverage, and longevity. And when a league is born under the shadow of a star it never truly had, it must work twice as hard to prove it doesn't need that shadow to survive. Because borrowed gravity eventually fades. And only real identity remains.